Bit of an interesting one tonight. This is going to be part one of a review on a little sort of cine quad or cine whoop, and this is the FUS X111. And FUS is not really a brand I have any knowledge of, but I got this as a punt. Basically, one of the good things about being able to get free stuff from Banggood, etc., is that you don't have to worry if it's a lot of rubbish. So I saw in this something that potentially could make it a really good, interesting platform if you like cinematic stuff and small quads. What we need to see is whether it's going to be a load of rubbish. But here's the little guy in question, and you can see it's a little tiny sort of cine quad of a similar vein to the much bigger Taycan, etc. And the Taycan is a 3-inch quad, and this guy is 2.5 inch. And I've liked these little cine whoops. This is my Diaton Taycan, which carries a naked Euro 6 and has a Cadex Vista in it. And the thing that caught my eye about this guy is it looks like a really lightweight platform to run, you know, a stripped Hero 6 or you know, possibly the 360 Go or something like that. And it was one of those quads that I kind of looked at and thought potentially it could be great or it could be really, really rubbish. So I thought I'd review it and see. So this is going to be part one of the review, because right now I've no idea whether this is going to be awesome or trash. There might be a part two of this review, because this guy as it stands is a little analog quad. One of the things that made me want to do this review is you can quite easily fit a Vista on it, and as I said, create a mount to use the aforementioned Hero 6, etc. Sadly, my stripped Hero 6 appears to have died, or at least I've got the red light of doom. So unless it magically comes to life, I might have to change tact on that. But yeah, let's have a closer look at this guy. It comes in a PMP, so you need to put your own receiver in it. But the big thing about it is it's dirt cheap, sort of 75 quid. And when you weigh up, you're getting 4 1106 motors, which would cost you about 20 quid, about 30 quid. There's a little 20 amp all-in-one flight controller, which are about 30 quid. Suddenly, it's looking like amazing value, and you've got a 15 quid Runcam Nano 2 on it. So let's have a little look at this guy. So as I said, it comes in this little papery box, and you don't get a huge amount of stuff. You get 4 Gemfan 2540 props, ignore that. You get some screws and some receiver tubes, and you get a little manual that just gives you a very basic pinout, which is actually really nice. The specs of the quad, the VTX gubbins, and some general specs. And it looks like you can get this one with a Runcam split or that sort of thing in it. So let's just quickly look at it. So this should be pretty familiar to anybody who's looking at quads at the moment. We've essentially got one of these EVA foam covered ducted quads, and we've got little 1106 motors, and this is where things start getting potentially rubbish or very, very interesting. These motors are 3800 kV, which I would say is pretty low for a quad spinning 2.5 inch props. However, given this is supposed to be a sort of indoor or more cinematic floating around type quad, that might not be such a bad shout. The choice of 1106s is maybe slightly odd in my opinion. Maybe a wider, shorter motor would have been better than potentially a very tall motor, which will have the majority of its power higher up the throttle band rather than lower where potentially would want it here. But again, this is all sort of speculation until I get it in the air. Now, the one thing that you'll notice is this guy is not gonna survive a huge amount of bashing. However, it feels super rigid, and the whole design of it with these sort of triangles and the way it's bracing itself, etc., is really sort of maximizing the amount of strength that you're going to get from these tiny little, you know, 2 or 3 mil wide braces. And it's a really simple design, just one sort of long piece, and it has lots of sort of little nice clever touches. The run cam is really firmly held in place by some little TPU mounts. The VTX, which is 25, 100 or 200 milliwatt, is nicely held in the back with a little, again, a 3D printed mount. We've got this LED on the back, which is the only bit I don't like. It looks like it's kind of an afterthought, but even that is nicely held on by the 3D mount and screwed into place. And the whole thing seems like pretty good quality. In terms of the motors, obviously I don't know what they're going to fly like until I get them in the air. They feel and look okay, but the one thing that immediately sprung to mind, which you probably won't be able to see, is they're very tall. Seems to be a huge gap between the base of the motor and the actual motor mount. And if you compare it to, for argument's sake, this is a Beta FPV 1106, the same size motor. If I put them side by side, you will see there's a definite difference in terms of height, which makes me wonder if that is the reason why when you put the props on, they don't sit as deep as I maybe would prefer them to. They sit, I mean, you are still getting the prop guard effect, but they're a little bit higher than I would ideally want. I'm wondering whether the motors were sourced or built after the frame was designed, because if this motor was a couple of mil shorter, as the Beta FPV one is, and most other 1106s will be, this prop guard will do more, or it'll be more effective. You could still cut somebody with your motor spinning there if you sort of went into them. I'm saying prop guards because these aren't, I mean, they are ducks, but you're clearly not going to get any thrust benefit as you would do on a proper squirt or even the Taycan. There's a country mile of space around these, which leads me on to the fact that these Gemfan 2540s are horrible props for these type of quads. I don't know why every quad seems to include these, including the Beta FPV stuff. But the Gemfan D63, which is a 63mm prop and designed for this type of quad, looks like it will just about fit in these ducks. So I'm hoping when I get some, that might be a nice prop to use. But you can see it's just a super simple thing. We've got one wire going to the camera, and it's nice that it's attached with a plug. We've got a wire going back to the VTX and the LEDs, and then we've got this all-in-one flight controller, which to me looks very much like the sort of Gemsu or JHEMCU type flight controllers. It's just that this one has a vertical USB, so you can still access it even though it's tucked inside there. And the pinout looks, to me, off the top of my head, pretty much identical to those Gemsu boards, which is a good thing because they have two proper broken out UARTs. So if you do want to stick a Vista or something like that in it, you've got the UARTs to do it. Speaking of, you can see there is an acre of space in this stack and an acre of space above as well. So one of the reasons I said this is probably going to be part one is because if I like this frame, I'm going to stick a Vista in it because it looks to me like the ideal candidate. There isn't a huge amount else to say. It's just an AIO board 20 amp, 25 amp burst, rated up to 4S, and they say that this quad is designed for 2 to 4S, and it mentions in the blurb using a 4S 450 battery. Now I haven't got one of those. I have 3S 550, which I suspect is probably going to be a better size for this guy. I have a 4S 750, which is pretty lightweight one, tattoo oil line, and I've got my normal 3S 550s, the bigger type. I'm not sure whether I want to run this on 4S. I think it might be wasted, but I'll give it a go. It's a shame I haven't got any 450 4S batteries, but that's always struck me as an uncomfortable size. The cells themselves are going to be so small. Is it really any work? Is there really any point having a 4S battery? But I might be wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly solder in a receiver into this guy. It's dead easy. They've given you the pin out. It's just RX and TX, 5 volt and power. So I'm going to do that off camera. One thing just to mention as well, you've also got 20 by 20 mounts on the bottom. So potentially what we have here is a little tiny, lightweight, hopefully quiet cine whoop. Potentially a proper cine whoop, like, as I said, the aforementioned much bigger diatone Taycan. And then I'll give it a go on analog. Been a long time since I've flown analog. So I'll fly it on analog. I have also, somewhat naughtily, quickly designed a full-size GoPro mount, which sits like so. So I'm going to see if it will carry the incredibly heavy Hero 8. I suspect it probably will do very badly, but I'm kind of curious as to see how good or bad it will be. I have a confession to make. This is the following day, and I've spent a lot of time filming flight footage, talking about things, talking about the setup, and you will notice that this quad does not have the Runcam Nano in that it came with. And that's because last night, after spending hours resoldering it, changing the wires, even removing the back case and resoldering it, I pronounced this camera dead on arrival and put in a new one. However, while finishing off this video, I noticed it has the bloody lens cap still on. I've clearly reached that age where I've become senile. So, I guess your reviewer is a tit. There is nothing wrong with this camera, nor was there ever, and I've wasted hours of my life. However, let's carry on with the video and pretend that the camera in here is in fact a Runcam Nano and not the Predator Nano that is currently sat there in front of you. Let's be honest, this is analog. They both look pretty bad. This one is very marginally better than this one, but we're not here to look at analog footage. Moving on. So, Crossfire is wired in, and I've just basically zip tied it to the bottom of this little spine part here. I've made one addition to the build, and that's because I want my quads to last and I want to fly this guy. I've added in a little 330 UF 35 volt capacitor, and I've done that not because this guy has any video noise, which it didn't. The only thing it had is a very faint black banding, and that's because of the proximity of the Crossfire antennas to the VTX, which I've put in there. I've just done that to stop any voltage spikes damaging the components, because if you fly toothpicks, you will know that any of these all-in-one flight controllers are highly likely to either not work or one of the ESCs randomly die, or the voltage regulator fail for some unknown reason. And that doesn't matter who you buy it from, whether it's iFlight or Beta FPV, or this one, which, as I said, is basically that Gemsu board with a vertical USB, which was, in my opinion, the most reliable one. However, I've heard that later batches of that one have gone south as well, so who knows. However, everything is working hunky-dory with this quad. I have flashed Betaflight 4.2, and all I have done is put in my own rates, set up my aux channels, but I have also set up RPM filtering. So I've flashed Jazz Maverick 0.77 to give me RPM filters, and the reason why I've done that is RPM filters, in my experience, tend to give me cooler motors, and if my plan is to lug or try and lug a Hero 8 around, I'm going to be getting hot motors, and I need to counteract that. So that aside, let's talk about my findings that I have found while I've been flying it over the last day and a half. As I said, I've created this mount, and this mount works great with the Hero 8, but of course it sits the Hero 8, which weighs 128 grams, 13 grams more than this quad, at the very front on the nose. So I've also designed a little same type of mount, screw mount, which will just sit in the centre, and at a later date I'm just going to run, or try and run, the Hero 8 here and the battery underneath to try and centralise the weight a bit. So let's look at some footage. So first off, I took this guy out and I flew it on 3S, and on 3S it's pretty much what I expected it to be. It feels like a sort of larger tiny whoop. It's nice and smooth, it flies pretty nicely, it doesn't have a ton of power or speed, it doesn't really suffer from washout so much, but if it catches the wind it gets a little bit, a fraction bumpy if you're doing a move, and it's perfectly capable of doing basic acro. So that's the boring part out of the way. If you put it on 4S, and the batteries I've been using on 4S are these guys, which are GNB 750 4S, which is much bigger than they recommend you using, but these are the smaller ones I've got. The 3S packs that I was using were the Airline 3S 550s. So I put one of these in, and the quad is tons more agile, has tons more power, which is unusual. Quite often on 2.5-inch quads, the extra weight of a 4S battery tends to sort of remove a lot of the agility, but this battery brought these motors alive, which, as I said, because they're a relatively low kV, 3800, is probably why. So with 4S it becomes much quicker. It's got tons of power, tons of punch, tons of pickup pace, and it will do any sort of acro trick you ask of it. Mine isn't tuned whatsoever. All I've done is drop the filters a couple of points, and it needs a lot of work to try and counteract some of the bad characteristics of this type of quad, namely getting caught in the wind and odd bobbles. But it flies fast and true, apart from, as I said, the wind issues. Now, the bigger part of this video, and the bit that I am so excited about, is I put this guy on it, which is, as I said, a Hero 8. Now, I've been flying Hero 6s and Hero 7 stripped ones on, as I said, the little diatom whoop. But the problem with stripping a GoPro is you remove a lot of the protection. And I'm currently, I think, into my second lost stripped Hero. And through no reason that I can see, I haven't had any particular bad crashes. I've had a few bumps, but they just seem to randomly die, whether you're using the Beta FPV BEC that comes with it, or whether you're powering from a separate regulator in your quad, they just don't seem to last very long. And I'm very loath to spend another 180 quid or so on another Hero 6 for it to last 5 minutes and give me a load of hassle in the meantime. So I really hoped that this guy would carry a Hero 8, and it's a big ask. Hero 8 weighs 128 grams. That's 12 grams more than even a Hero 7 or a Hero 6. It's a hugely heavy piece of equipment, and sticking it on the front of a quad that weighs 115 grams is not a good idea. The surprising part of this is this guy on 3S really struggles to get off the ground with this guy. All you get is Betaflight giving you those silly runaway warnings. You can get it up in the air, but it's not particularly pleasant. It's doable, but it's not much fun. On 4S, not only does it carry it at around 50% throttle, and once you're up in the air, carries it super easily, it will carry it for 6 minutes. 6 minutes! That's about 3 times what I get out of my Diaton. That's about what you would get on a full-sized heavy Cinequad, like a Squirt or the Diaton Taycan. And okay, we're not talking 6 minutes of proper flying, we're talking about 6 minutes of flying slowly and steadily to get cinematic footage. But 6 minutes? I'm absolutely blown away. So, that is pretty much it for me. This quad carries a Hero 8 for 6 minutes. No more messing with stripped GoPros. And because it does it so easily, mine at a later date is going to get the DJI treatment, because while the little VTX it comes with is 200 milliwatt, and to be honest, it did absolutely fine even with its little dipole antenna, so it'll do much better if you put even a Foxy or Lollipop Nano on it. So if you put any sort of antenna on it, you're going to get better performance. But it did fine for a 200 milliwatt VTX. No complaints whatsoever. Much better than you usually get on sort of the usual Earsheen, etc. tiny, or should I say cheap Chinese quads. So mine is going to get a Cadex Vista, and I'm going to strip the Cadex Vista because this guy has got tons of air running through it because it's so open. And it should be able to carry the Cadex Vista and the Hero for a good 5 minutes, which absolutely will do me. And while that 5 minutes is not going to be full of full throttle punch outs and acro, although it will, as you can see here, flip and roll, etc., it will give me all the cinematic footage that I need, because all you need when it's about cinematic is slow, regular, steady movements, and this guy can do all of those just as well as its bigger Taycan brother. So look out for this guy in upcoming videos. As I said, I'm going to experiment with some prints. I'll upload these guys to Thingiverse if you want to print them off. As I said, they're works in progress, they're not finished. I just need to get a longer battery strap so I can loop through this part of the frame. The other thing that springs to mind, actually, what you could do is, one of the downsides of this quad, and it doesn't have it hugely without the Hero, but with the Hero on it, you will, when you try and descend, much like a Squirt does, you will sometimes get hit by wind and it will buck, and there's not a huge amount you can do about that. You've just got to kind of ride it out. Although I will try and increase my P's and I's and try and stiffen the quad up a little bit and remove that. But one of the things that might be worthwhile, or I might try, is to turn it into a pusher, because naturally they fly better than a puller quad like this, which is getting its air disturbed by obviously even these minimal ducts. So if I was to flip it over, while at the moment it's propped so a little bit too far out to do it comfortably, I could simply use some M3 washers to raise this bottom plate up a little bit, and that will allow me just to simply reverse the flight controller orientation in beta flight, change the motor order and rotation, and run it as a pusher. And that is why I'm really excited about it. 75 quid for 100 quid worth of probably of components and a little tiny hand size whoop that somewhat astoundingly carries a Hero 8, and that isn't even taken into account that we can probably fit, as I said, those larger Gem Fan 63mm props there or thereabouts, although we may have to trim them down ever so slightly, and they should put out quite a bit more thrust than these guys. And if we were to find some quad blade props, which would give us less speed but more low throttle authority, that would be pretty interesting too. So yeah, I'm absolutely blown away. All of these components, the motors are smooth, the flight controller is just a standard one, that's 30 quid. You know, how much are 4 1106 motors? 30 quid. Camera that works fine even though I thought it wasn't is 15 quid. VTX is 10 or 15 quid, and how much for a frame? 75 quid. Absolute bargain of the century. But like all these things, and I can't say this enough, you may end up with a flaky flight controller even if you spend double the amount and buy the Diaton 2.5 inch, which I wouldn't recommend because it weighs a ton. Or if you spend double the amount and get the Beta FPV one. This isn't to do with this frame. All of these components are flaky. These AOI flight controllers, you're either lucky or you're not. Camera, despite what I initially said, will be absolutely fine, and the motors are whisper smooth. Haven't really got anything else to say. It was fucking unbelievably superb. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.